My mother called on the first Friday of October, her voice sugary and rehearsed. "Claire, honey, we're having a family BBQ this weekend. Everyone's excited to see you." It was almost charming how she could lie so easily. In our family, everyone usually meant themselves: Mom, Dad, Andrea, and the boys. I was rarely part of the count. I knew it, and I think deep down they did too. Still, I said I'd come. Not because I wanted to, because not showing up would be twisted into proof I didn't care. And I did care more than I should have, probably. So I made my green bean casserole, put on the blue sweater Mom always said was more flattering, and drove from my little condo to their colonial two-story, the same house where every picture frame told me I didn't quite belong. When I arrived, Andrea was already on the back deck, surrounded by laughter. Her hair was up in that messy, perfect bun. Her boys, Liam and Caleb, raced through the yard, trailing giggles and Nerf darts. I stood there holding the casserole dish, forgotten. "Claire, sweetheart." Mom came out, arms open, lips pressed into a smile that didn't touch her eyes. She hugged me briefly, then turned back to the grill as if checking a box. Dad gave me a nod from behind his beer. Andrea didn't get up, just waved lazily with a plastic cup in hand. I set the casserole on the folding table next to a store-bought lasagna. Andrea probably didn't even reheat herself. As I adjusted the foil, I caught sight of the mantel through the sliding door. Andrea's wedding photo still stood in the center, even though the man in it had been gone for almost a year. My college graduation photo, meanwhile, was nowhere in sight. Again. "Look who finally made it," Dad said later as I sat alone on the lawn chair furthest from the fire pit. The boys were playing some shouting game near the fence. Mom and Andrea were deep in conversation, their heads leaned in close. I sipped my lemonade and watched the sky darken. After dinner, Mom turned the spotlight on me. "So Claire, 34 now, right? Any news on the dating front?" Here it was, my portion of the night's programming. I forced a smile. "Work's been busy." Mom sighed long and theatrical. "We just worry. It's not natural to be alone for so long. Don't you want what Andrea had?" "You mean the divorce?" "I didn't say it," Dad chimed in. "Andrea's had a rough year. But she's coming through. Strong as ever." Andrea gave a tight smile, playing her role to perfection. Mom touched my arm gently, like this was affection and not guilt-drenched stagecraft. "You've always been so responsible. We know you don't need help." "But your sister?" I stiffened. The compliment was a setup. It always was. Something felt off. Every conversation felt preloaded, like they were working off a script. Even the food, Mom's rare tri-tip roast, Andrea's favorite potato salad, my childhood dessert with the nuts scraped off, felt curated for effect. By the time the kids were ushered inside and the plates were cleared, I was ready to leave. I stood brushing grass off my jeans and reached for my purse. That's when Dad stopped me. "Wait a second," he said, stepping forward with something thick in his hand. An envelope. "There's something important we all agreed you should see." He held it out with both hands as if it were a gift. I took it slowly, unsure. Mom was suddenly all smiles. "We wanted to tell you earlier, but tonight just felt right." I opened the envelope. A thick mortgage packet stared back at me. The address was unfamiliar. Loan documents, payment schedules. My name was penciled in next to terms I hadn't agreed to. Andrea was silent. Mom clapped her hands once softly. "We bought Andrea a home. And you're going to take over the payments." "I'm not paying this," I said, folding the mortgage paperwork with deliberate care. The pages felt heavy, each one a silent insult. "You can't just decide that for me." For a moment there was only the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint chirp of crickets outside. Then Dad spoke, low, firm, final. "We raised you," he said. "It's time to give back." Of course. That's what this was. Not a conversation, but a decree, cloaked in family rhetoric. I looked at the man across from me, the same man who once taught me to ride a bike, who cheered at my fifth-grade spelling bee, and saw someone entirely different, cold, closed, already convinced of his own righteousness. I held the packet tighter, resisting the urge to crumple it. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You bought a house for someone who can't afford it. Without asking her. Without asking me. And you just assumed I'd pay." Mom, perched on the edge of the sofa like a benevolent monarch, folded her hands primly. "Andrea has children. You don't. You have a good job. A nice little condo. No one's asking you to struggle." I let out a bitter laugh. "This is struggling, Mom. Being handed someone else's debt and being told to smile about it. That's a struggle." Andrea hadn't said a word. She sat curled in the corner armchair, her fingers clasped in her lap, like she was waiting for someone to rescue her from a fire she'd lit herself. I stared at her, willing her to meet my eyes. She didn't. "Is this about fairness?" Dad asked. "Because life's not fair, Claire. You've had it easy. No kids. No divorce. It's time you stepped up." There it was. The family narrative, neat and sharpened like a blade. My success was a mark against me. My independence a debt owed. No children meant I was free to fund someone else's. "I've paid Andrea's rent," I said, voice tight. Her lawyer, her grocery bills. Every time she cried, I was the one who stepped in. I never said no, and I never expected anything in return. "Exactly," Mom said, as if that proved her point. "You've always been dependable." "No," I snapped. "I've been convenient." Dad stood now. Not a threatening movement, but one meant to signal he was finished sitting. He walked over to the fireplace, adjusted a photo of Andrea and the boys, then turned back to me. "You think you're better than the rest of us?" I blinked. "What?" He stepped closer. "You think because you have a job and a condo and no kids that you're above doing your part." My heart pounded in my chest loud enough I could hear it in my ears. I was still holding my car keys in my left hand, the cold metal biting into my palm, my freedom literally within reach. I stood. "I'm not doing this," I said, each word anchored with the force of something long suppressed. "I didn't sign up for this. And you should have asked, because the answer is no." Andrea made a small noise. Not a word, just a tremble of breath, a whimper of discomfort. She didn't defend me, didn't object to them throwing this on me. Her silence was not weakness. It was permission. I turned to her. "Say something." She looked up at me, eyes rimmed with tears. "I didn't know they'd stop," I cut in. "You let them. You sat there and let them do this." "She's scared," Mom said. "Can't you see that?" I shook my head slowly. "I see exactly what this is." Dad's jaw clenched. His face hardened like concrete drying in real time. "If you walk out now, don't expect to be welcome here again." 3 days later, my cousin April texted me out of nowhere. "You're seriously not helping Andrea." After everything she's been through, I blinked at the message, unsure whether to laugh or throw my phone across the room. I hadn't spoken to April in nearly a year. Our last exchange had been a happy birthday text with a thumbs-up reaction. Now she was suddenly invested in my moral compass. It had begun. The campaign. My phone pinged again. And again. A voicemail this time from Aunt Pat, sounding both bewildered and disappointed. "Claire, sweetheart, I just heard. Is it true that you're refusing to help Andrea? I can't believe it. I raised you better than that." I paused the message before she could get to the scripture part. Aunt Pat always folded guilt into a layer of righteous devotion. God and guilt, our family's favorite duo. Then came Uncle Don, whose last memory of me probably involved me picking peas out of a Thanksgiving casserole. "You think you're too good for this family now," he grumbled in a voice note. "You'd rather see your nephews on the street than lift a finger." I turned off the sound and watched the screen light up with more names I hadn't seen in months. My father's sister, my mother's cousin. Even an old church acquaintance from my teen years. Different senders, same message. The phrasing was eerily alike. Scripted. Coordinated. It was obvious someone, Andrea or my parents, had started a whisper campaign. I wasn't supposed to fight back. I was supposed to fold. Buckle under the weight of collective disappointment, give in to the pressure of familial shame. That's how this was supposed to play out. Claire, the dependable one, the quiet one, the single one, finally doing her duty. That was the role they had written for me, and I had gone off script. My condo, once a sanctuary of muted tones and quiet space, now vibrated with accusation. Every buzz from my phone was another jab, another voice echoing the same disapproval. I left the device on the counter and retreated to the sofa, curling into the silence, but even that couldn't shield me. The words seeped through, selfish, cold, ungrateful. I stared out the window as raindrops slid down the glass, tracing the same paths over and over like they were stuck in a loop. The irony wasn't lost on me. Then a message popped up from someone I hadn't expected, one of Andrea's old co-workers. "Hey, no judgment," it began. "But I thought you should know they're showing people that mortgage clause. The part where your name is penciled in as responsible." My stomach dropped. Someone had leaked the paperwork. I hadn't shown it to anyone, not even friends from work. That meant it came from the source, Andrea, or my parents. So they weren't just framing me with guilt. They were crafting a legal narrative, planting evidence, prepping their side. I stood numb and walked toward the kitchen. I needed water, air, something to cleanse the feeling crawling up my spine. The edge of betrayal was no longer emotional, it was tactical. This wasn't just about family disappointment, it was a maneuver, a trap. Then came the knock at the door. A plain envelope rested on my doormat. No return address, thick paper, legal weight. I opened it slowly, fingers trembling as if my body already knew what my mind hadn't yet caught up to. It was a civil complaint, filed in Washington County Superior Court. From Margaret and Robert Whitmore, against Claire Whitmore. Claim $350,000 in reimbursement for unpaid familial obligations, including but not limited to housing, education, and general cost of upbringing. I sat down hard on the floor, the envelope limp in my hands. My breathing went shallow. My parents were suing me. Not a threat. Not an empty tantrum. They had gone to court, filed the paperwork, signed their names. "They're not bluffing," I whispered. "They're suing me. I never imagined my own parents would drag me to court." But here I was, sitting across from a lawyer explaining why I was being sued by the people who raised me. Leah Brody's office was lined with files and framed degrees, the air scented faintly with lemon-scented cleaner and quiet competence. No nonsense, no fluff, just case law and precision. She sat behind a polished oak desk, scanning the complaint with sharp, tired eyes. A hint of amusement tugged at the corner of her mouth as she read. "The phrase, failure to reciprocate emotional investment, isn't something we typically see in a civil suit," she said, flipping a page. "They actually put that in here." I nodded, exhausted. Page 3. Just after the part where they called me the financially secure daughter who has reaped the benefits of an upper-middle-class upbringing. Leah chuckled, more bitter than amused. Sounds like someone's airing their disappointment in legalese. I hadn't slept the night before. Not really. I kept running through moments that now felt surreal in hindsight, times I had said yes too quickly, moments I had brushed off, guilt-laden jabs, the way Andrea's silence always hovered like smoke over every confrontation. But sitting here in this office, something had begun to settle. Clarity. Or maybe a quiet rage finally taking shape. Leah continued skimming the packet, pulling out a legal pad. "Okay, we've got a few angles. First, this isn't going anywhere unless they can prove a contract implied or written, which they can't. I have records," I said, digging into the folder I'd brought. "Bank transfers, rent checks, grocery reimbursements, even an attorney retainer for Andrea's divorce. I've already been supporting her. Thousands of dollars worth. Leah raised an eyebrow. That's more than generous. I pushed the receipts toward her. It was never a question until now. They didn't ask. They just assumed. She laid them out in neat rows, scanning dates and amounts. This helps. It shows a long-standing pattern of voluntary support, which in legal terms makes it a gift, not a debt. A flicker of hope stirred in me, but it was quickly tempered by the throb of betrayal still pulsing behind my ribs. This isn't about money, I said almost to myself. Not really. Leah met my gaze. No, this is punishment. A message. They're betting that shame will do the job before any judge has to. The quiet that followed felt heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was choice. I thought about the mortgage packet, the guilt-tripping calls, the orchestrated messages from relatives I barely knew. They hadn't just turned their backs, they'd drawn a line and dared me to cross it. Leah leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. You have 3 options, she said. 1, settle, pay some symbolic amount, and let them feel they won. 2, surrender entirely, give them what they want, and keep the peace, whatever that means now. 3, fight. Take them on. Expose the inconsistencies. File a countersuit if it escalates. She tapped the complaint again. They're assuming you'll cave. Let's prove them wrong. I sat still, staring down at the legal pad, the words dancing in front of me. Then I looked up. Good, I said quietly, my voice even. Because I'm done pretending I don't see what they're doing. Grandma opened the door before I knocked the second time. I've been waiting, she said. You shouldn't have had to go through this alone. Her voice was thin but steady, warm, with something I hadn't heard in a long time. Care, not obligation. The screen door creaked behind me as she pulled me into the entryway of their old farmhouse, the familiar scent of cinnamon wood polish and faded lilac hitting me like a memory. The air inside was cooler than outside, heavy with age, but untouched by pretense. I made tea, she said, ushering me into the living room. Figured you wouldn't want coffee after all this. I sat, not trusting my voice. Around me, the furniture was the same as it had always been: plaid upholstery, crocheted doilies, and too many family photos in mismatched frames. Some were recent, mostly of Andrea's kids. Others were older. I noticed mine were small, tucked behind others like footnotes. It used to hurt. Now it just confirmed what I already knew. Grandpa Frank appeared from the hallway, silent as always, with his thick gray eyebrows arched in what I guessed was concern. He nodded once and sat across from me, arms folded. I don't know where to start, I said, my voice breaking around the edges. You don't have to, Grandma Eleanor said. We know. That stunned me. For a moment, I couldn't tell if they meant they'd read about the lawsuit, if the family smear campaign had reached even here, or if something else had always been known and simply unspoken. I never thought they'd actually sue me, I admitted. I knew they'd guilt trip, maybe threaten, but this? You didn't do anything wrong, Grandma said sharply. Your parents. They've let that girl Andrea run things for far too long. She's not even the one talking to me, I said. It's always Mom, Dad. And all these relatives I haven't seen in years suddenly have opinions. Grandpa grunted. Sounds like Margaret's doing. She always did love a good performance. Claire, Grandma said, turning serious. There's something we've been meaning to tell you. And we should have told you years ago. But we were afraid. Or maybe just too old to start fights we thought didn't matter anymore. She stood, slowly walked to the hallway closet and returned with a box the size of a large book. It was taped shut, labeled in her handwriting. Claire, do not discard. I wrote that 10 years ago, she said, when your grandfather and I made our will. I blinked, heart suddenly thudding in my chest. Your will? We had a family property, Grandpa said finally, speaking clearly. A small lake house. Nothing big but clean. Paid off. We left it to you. That was the original plan. But then Grandma cut in. Your mother found out. Said Andrea needed the inheritance more, that she was going through a divorce. That you were doing fine, so why not even the scales? Her voice dripped with old bitterness. She pressured us to revise the documents. My mouth went dry. Did you? Grandpa leaned forward, hands clasped. We signed a new version, but I kept the original. He pulled another envelope from his sweater vest and handed it to me. It was thick yellowed, sealed with wax, and stapled shut twice. Across the front, executed will, 2013. This was never destroyed, he said. Just buried. I stared at it, barely breathing. My name was in the header. Inheritor. Sole beneficiary of the lake house. Dated witness notarized. They never meant for you to know, Grandma said. But I couldn't watch this anymore. You deserve to know someone saw you. Someone believed in you. Everything inside me stilled. All the pieces, Andrea's endless bad luck, the constant redirection of resources, my place in the family as the dependable fallback. It hadn't been coincidence. It had been strategy. A long con played slowly by people who smiled while cutting. The tea sat untouched as I held the envelope, numb with recognition. I stood slowly. Thank you, I said, voice raw. This changes everything. Grandpa gave a single nod. I stepped out into the twilight, the cool air biting at my face as I pulled out my phone and dialed. Leah answered on the second ring. I found something, I said, barely above a whisper. It changes everything. Leah tapped her finger once sharply on the printout in front of her. The fluorescent light above her desk made the paper almost glow. Claire, she said, her voice lower, now edged with something unfamiliar, concern or maybe disbelief. Who opened this secondary credit account under your name in 2020? I blinked, then leaned in. The document showed a credit card I didn't recognize. It was issued under my name, linked to my social security number, but with an address that wasn't mine, the Whitmore house. That can't be right, I said. I never opened that. Leah raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? No chance you co-signed something for Andrea or your parents? No, never. I don't even remember this card. What was it used for? She handed over a thicker packet of statements. Clothes, home appliances, a down payment on a Honda Odyssey. Charges are mostly from 2020 to 2022. I flipped through the papers, each line item hitting like a slap. Kids' Own Toy Store, JCPenney, Kroger, realtor payments, legal services, Andrea's attorney. All of it traced back to one silent, insidious account I didn't know existed. Then a deposit record stood out, $25,000 transferred from my checking account into the Whitmore Family Trust, marked as special support. The same trust they mentioned at the BBQ, the one tied to Andrea's mortgage. Leah watched me quietly as I stared at the numbers. There's no physical signature on the application, she said. It was submitted digitally, from an IP address registered to your parents' home. The memory came back slowly like a bruise surfacing. Summer 2020. Mom had come over to help Andrea file for state aid. I'd just finished a long work call when she asked to borrow my ID for photocopying. It's just paperwork, she'd said with a smile. Nothing dramatic. I never asked what happened to the copy. I gave her my driver's license, I said quietly. She said it was to apply for relief programs, COVID stuff for Andrea. I didn't think twice. Leah's voice was calm but firm. Did you give her your social? She already had it. From when I was a kid. Insurance school forms. We sat in silence. The hum of the office printer in the background suddenly felt deafening. Claire, Leah said, folding her hands. If you didn't authorize this and you're sure it's no longer a civil matter, this is fraud. The word settled like ice on my skin. But it's my mother, I whispered. That doesn't change what it is, she replied. In fact, it makes it worse, because it means this wasn't an accident. This was calculated. I swallowed hard. Can the bank do anything? I already called in a contact. We'll go in together tomorrow, but understand the bank's priority will be protecting itself, not exposing your family. The next day, I followed Leah into the local branch downtown. It looked the same as it always had: glass doors, fake ferns, that faint smell of industrial carpet and air conditioning. The teller recognized me and smiled. I didn't smile back. A woman in a charcoal blazer greeted us and led us to a side office. She introduced herself as Tanya. Her expression flickered when Leah explained the reason for our visit. Tanya pulled up the records on her screen, her fingers clicking quickly over the keyboard. Yes. The account was opened online June 2020, she confirmed. Used the Whitmore House address. Email matched the one used for Claire's mortgage pre-approval years ago. I never used that email again, I said. Only my mother had access to it after the refinance. Tanya hesitated. That might explain the login, but the authorization was done via DocuSign. I can request a time-stamped version. We keep digital audit trails. Leah nodded. We'll need that, along with any flagged activity. Tanya looked uneasy now. Do you want to file a fraud report? My mouth opened, then closed. I looked at Leah. She'll need time, Leah said. But yes. Start the paperwork. Back in the car, I sat silently while Leah buckled her seatbelt. Outside, the world went on: people grocery shopping, kids walking home from school, parents texting on sidewalks, and somewhere in a house full of smiling photo frames and white picket fencing, my mother had used my identity to fund my sister's life. I stared out the window. Leah turned to me. If you didn't sign this, Claire, she said quietly, we're dealing with more than betrayal. This was premeditated. Financially and legally. They've crossed into criminal territory. I exhaled slowly, the rage no longer a flame but a steady burn. Then, we treat it like a crime. Melissa arrived 5 minutes early. I saw her through the cafe window, already seated back straight, both hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug. The same corner table where we used to cram for finals. The same chair where years ago she cried alone as the room slowly emptied around her. I paused at the door before walking in. Claire, she said, rising halfway. Her smile was brief, more polite than warm. Thank you for meeting me, I said, slipping into the chair across from her. She studied me for a moment, her gaze sharper than I remembered. Gone was the girl with the shy laugh and oversized hoodies. This Melissa was measured, controlled. There was history etched into her posture. You said this was about Andrea, she began. I nodded. You once tried to warn people about her. I didn't listen then. Melissa's fingers tightened around her mug. No one did. I reached into my bag, pulled out the bank statement copy, and laid it on the table. My mother Andrea, they used my name, my accounts. I'm being sued. And that's just the beginning. Melissa gave a small, humorless laugh. She's finally doing it in public then. I looked up. Doing what? She leaned forward. You don't know the half of it. In 2018, we co-managed the school's alumni fund. Small scholarships. Nothing glamorous. One day there was a $6,000 shortfall. I got blamed. Admin froze me out. Andrea stepped back like she was shocked, then resigned 2 days later. For her health? I frowned. But you never said I did, she interrupted. I emailed. Called. I even asked to present the receipts I'd collected showing Andrea withdrew cash from the fund for personal expenses. Nobody listened. Not the board. Not the principal. And definitely not your parents when they were quietly pulled in. I swallowed hard. I'd heard the rumors back then. I'd watched Melissa disappear from social media. I'd believed it was burnout. I have 2 things, she said, reaching into her coat. One's an email Andrea sent after I asked her to explain the withdrawals. She said, if you don't want your internship references to dry up, I'd suggest you shut your mouth. She handed me a printout. The second item was a small voice recorder. I kept this, she said. Out of spite, mostly. She clicked play. It was a group chat. Andrea's voice was unmistakable. Laughing, smug, commanding. Come on, she said. Even if she talks, no one's going to believe her. Everyone in my family protects me. My sister. She's a ghost. She wouldn't dare. And if she does, my mom will shut her up. I didn't realize I was gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles ached. That was from a brunch, Melissa said. Andrea was bragging. Said you were the family's insurance policy. That you'd never risk being disowned. She was right, I whispered. Until now. Melissa nodded. They ruined my career. I had to transfer, start over. But I didn't have proof strong enough for court. You, though, you're in a different position. I looked at her. Her eyes held no pity, only resolve. You're not the first person they've sacrificed, she said. But you could be the last if you're brave enough to burn their shield. The phrase stayed with me even after we hugged goodbye. As I walked to my car, the recorder felt heavy in my coat pocket. Not just because of what it held, but because of what it represented: history. A pattern, a path forward. They had counted on silence. And for years we'd all given it to them. But silence had never protected us. It had only protected them. And I was done being quiet. Grandma Eleanor opened the cabinet drawer beneath the fireplace with trembling hands. The wood creaked like it hadn't been touched in years. Behind stacks of old newspapers and a yellowing recipe book, she pulled out a faded pillow cushion, unzipped the cover, and retrieved a folded bundle wrapped in wax paper. I don't trust my daughter, she said, laying it gently on the coffee table. But I trust you. Her voice cracked not with weakness but with years of restraint finally given permission to break. I stared at the silver-edged papers, too stunned to speak. I should have shown you this sooner, she went on. But I wasn't sure if you'd still want anything to do with us after all this. I didn't even know this existed, I said quietly. You were fresh out of college, she explained. Frank and I thought it was time to make sure the Salem house had a future. You were the only one who'd ever visited it without complaining. You called it peaceful. I still do, I said, throat tightening. She smiled wistfully. So we made a will. We gave your mother a copy. We kept ours hidden. Frank emerged from the hallway without a word, holding a manila folder. He sat beside her and passed it to me. Inside was a notarized document dated June 2015. Eleanor and Frank's signatures, legal stamps, witness lines filled in. It named me as the sole inheritor of the Salem property contingent upon their passing. I swallowed. But I thought Margaret had the updated version. She does, Eleanor said, her lips pressing into a thin line. Or at least, she said she was taking the original to revise a few terms with the lawyer in 2020. That was the year everything changed, I murmured. She promised to return it, Eleanor continued. Said she just wanted to adjust some tax language. But weeks passed. Then months. When I asked, she said the lawyer would be mailing the updated version soon. It never came. She took it, I said. Frank nodded slowly. She wanted to erase the past, Eleanor said, now bitter. Including you. My fingers trembled as I turned the final page. But if this version was never voided, then it's still valid, Eleanor finished. Especially if you have a certified copy. I do now, I said. Frank rose, walked over to the scanner on the corner table, and gestured. He made a digital backup the same day, Eleanor said. He never told me until last week. Said he was waiting to see where your mother was leading things. For a moment we just sat in silence. Not the suffocating silence of dinner tables filled with judgment. Not the bitter silence of family meetings where my opinions were drowned out. This was different. This was aligned. I used to think your silence meant agreement, I told Eleanor. That you were just like them. She looked at me, eyes misting. I wanted to believe my daughter had a reason, that she was just under stress. but the more I watched, the more I knew I was wrong. And I regret every year I didn't stop her. I reached for her hand. She didn't flinch. We weren't healing a wound tonight, but we were acknowledging it, and that mattered. I took the flash drive Frank handed me and returned to my condo in near silence, the drive like a compass in my coat pocket. At my desk, I opened my laptop and attached the scanned will to an email addressed to Leah. Subject: Ree Whitmore Family Trust, Additional Evidence Body. We have a copy of the original will, unrevoked, witnessed, signed, certified, and below that just one line. Can we start the countersuit now? Leah tapped her pen against the edge of the table, eyes scanning the court's stamped docket. I didn't think they'd go this far, she said, more to herself than to me. Now I'm certain this isn't a civil spat. It's a layered manipulation. And you were their centerpiece. Her voice was steady, but beneath it I sensed a ripple of outrage. I sat across from her in the prep room, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Somewhere deep inside, I still expected to wake up and find this was a bad dream, that my parents weren't really trying to bankrupt me. But then I remembered the letter, the account in my name, the house deed. And I remembered April's text. The way everyone had turned, not because they understood the truth, but because they were handed a script. They thought I'd stay quiet, I said softly. That I'd stay the good daughter. Not make waves. Not fight back. Leah looked up from the file. They bet on your silence. And lost. Lane County's preliminary civil court wasn't grand or imposing. The hearing room was small, windowless, with flickering fluorescent lights. The wooden tables bore the scuff marks of hundreds of quiet battles. But today, it felt like a war room. Margaret and Robert sat across from us. My mother wore a pearl necklace I hadn't seen since my college graduation. My father avoided my eyes. He just kept fiddling with his tie like it was choking him. Andrea wasn't present. Just a slick, stone-faced attorney who introduced himself as Mr. Denning on behalf of Ms. Andrea Whitmore. He didn't shake hands. The judge entered, nodded briskly, and invited opening remarks. Leah stood. Your Honor, my client, Claire Whitmore, files a countersuit against Margaret and Robert Whitmore, citing financial coercion, unauthorized credit manipulation, and fraudulent interference with a legal inheritance. We are submitting one notarized unrevoked will dated June 2015. One forensic analysis of a bank transaction initiated without client consent, and one audio recording confirming undue family pressure by third-party Andrea Whitmore. The judge raised an eyebrow. You have all of that prepared. Now we do, Your Honor. Denning stood next. Given the countersuit's scope, the defense requests a continuance to properly respond. The judge glanced at the stack of exhibits. Request granted. But I'm not dragging this out. Full hearing scheduled in 2 weeks. No extensions. As the room cleared, I didn't expect them to speak to me. But Robert paused as he passed. His expression was uncharacteristically soft. Not gentle, just less steeled than usual. He leaned in, voice low. It's not worth it, Claire. You don't want to spend your life in a courtroom. I blinked at him. I didn't want to spend it in a lie either. He glanced toward Margaret, then back at me. You'll regret this. I didn't flinch. For a long time, I said I regretted staying quiet. Not anymore. His shoulders dropped just slightly, and then he turned and walked away. Leah and I stepped into the sunlit corridor outside the courtroom, the door shutting behind us like a vault closing on everything that used to hold me back. They didn't see it coming, Leah said. No, I replied, because they never thought I'd fight. And I meant it. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was pushing back. I need to amend the complaint, Leah said, her eyes fixed on the monitor's glow. There's a high probability one or more of their actions go beyond civil boundaries. Her voice was calm, but her typing had the urgency of someone racing against a clock. It was nearly 11 p.m. The office was bathed in the soft gold of desk lamps, the rest of the building silent, except for the occasional creak of old floorboards. Outside the window, Eugene was quiet, only the glow of passing cars cut through the darkness. But inside these walls, a storm was brewing. I sat across from her, arms folded over a legal pad I hadn't touched in 20 minutes. My brain was tired, my eyes stung. But I wasn't leaving. "What did you find?" I asked. Leah tapped a key, turned the monitor slightly toward me. "The $25,000 transfer Andrea made from your name into the Whitmore Family Trust." She pulled up a series of routing data and audit trails. It bounced through 3 different holding accounts within 48 hours. Classic sign of intra-family laundering. And that label, special assistance, isn't just vague. It's designed to bypass scrutiny. I leaned closer. "That's not just shady bookkeeping." "No," she said. "It's potentially criminal intent." She clicked again. A side-by-side image appeared. On the left, a scanned copy of a lease I'd signed for my old apartment. On the right, the digital signature from the 2020 credit account tied to me. The curve on the R in Whitmore, Leah pointed out. "Yours is tight. Theirs loops upward. You didn't sign that." She didn't say it with triumph, just certainty. We both sat still for a moment. Then she rose, crossed the room, and opened a locked drawer. From it, she retrieved a thick folder stamped and sealed. "I'm submitting this tonight," she said, placing the envelope before me. "It's a formal request to Lane County's DA to initiate a criminal investigation into identity fraud, document tampering, and unauthorized access of financial instruments." My throat felt dry. "Will they take it seriously?" I asked. "They have to," she said. "Because now it's not just about who gets the house or the money. Now it's about the law." I looked down at the folder, then at my own hands, still trembling slightly. 5 years, I murmured. They started with little things. Phone bills, utility accounts, asking to borrow access. I didn't even notice it growing. And now Leah said, "You see the web for what it is." Her assistant Maya stepped in quietly with a confirmation slip. "Courier's downstairs. They'll get it to the DA's office before midnight." Leah nodded. "Perfect. Thank you." I stood, my body aching with fatigue, but the weight of the folder had done something strange to me. I wasn't scared. I was anchored. My life, the past 5 years of whispered guilt and shifting boundaries, was being named. Out loud. On paper. Under the jurisdiction of someone who wasn't part of their house of mirrors. As we packed up, I checked my phone. A new notification blinked. Voicemail from Melissa. I pressed play. Her voice was tight, almost breathless. "Claire, I don't know how much you've found, but Andrea does. She knows you're digging. Be careful. They won't let you do this quietly. I've been through it. And I'm telling you, once they feel cornered, they get desperate." The line went dead. I stood there staring at the phone like it had grown teeth. Leah glanced up. "Everything okay?" I slid the phone back into my bag. My voice came out flat. "It will be." But deep down, I knew something had shifted. The legal game was no longer the whole battlefield. They knew I wasn't going away. And that made me dangerous. "She sent me a letter," Melissa whispered, sliding the folded paper toward me like it was radioactive. "Andrea, she's trying to buy my silence." The blinds were shut tight, the only light coming from a single table lamp near the window. Outside, the wind howled against the old apartment building, and the heater clanked to life every few minutes, struggling against the Oregon chill. Inside, the air felt electric heavy with anticipation and old fear finally meeting the surface. I took the letter without a word, hand steady even as my pulse climbed. The handwriting was Andrea's, precise, slanted, almost pretty, if you didn't know what lived behind it. I read aloud slowly. "Melissa, I regret how things escalated. I know we've had our differences. I'd like to offer you $15,000 as a goodwill gesture to help you move forward and put all of this behind us. There was more, Apologies without ownership, concerns for everyone's future, legal phrases like mutually agreeable closure, but the intent was clear. I told you she'd come crawling, Melissa said, a slight edge of bitterness in her voice. She never apologizes unless it's a trap. I took out my phone. Will you let me record you? Just reading the letter and maybe saying how this makes you feel, it could matter in court. Melissa didn't hesitate. She nodded once. I want to finish this. She read the letter into the mic, her voice calm, deliberate. When she finished, she added softly, Andrea used to control everything: who got invited, who got blamed, who got erased. She tried to erase me. Now she wants to pay me to disappear. I'm done being silent. I sent the file to Leah immediately. Subject line: possible witness tampering. Urgent. Within 20 minutes, Leah replied, this is textbook bribery of a potential witness. She signed it, dated it, and sent it via USPS. We couldn't have asked for clearer evidence. I printed 2 copies of the letter, each one a nail in the coffin Andrea had quietly built herself. Then I drafted a short cover note addressed to the plaintiff's attorneys. Dear counsel, I believe you may want to reassess your strategy ahead of the hearing. Enclosed is new correspondence your client initiated with a potential witness in this matter. Best regards, Claire Whitmore. I sealed it, double-checked the address, and dropped it off myself at the mailbox across from Leah's office. I didn't trust email for this. I wanted it tangible. I wanted them to hold Andrea's desperation in their hands. By the time I got back to my car, my phone buzzed again. A text from Leah. Judge reviewed our supplemental motion. The evidentiary hearing will proceed publicly. 2 days from now. 2 days. The moment we'd been circling was finally set. My palms were damp against the steering wheel as I sat there watching a leaf spin across the windshield in the wind. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sobered. Because I knew what this next step meant. It meant Margaret and Robert would come dressed in family sorrow and legal armor. It meant Andrea, if she showed, would smile like none of this touched her, like her words didn't wound, like her hands hadn't reached into my future and rewritten it in her favor. But it also meant the walls were cracking. Their lies had started to leave a paper trail. And now we had it. I messaged Melissa before I drove away. Thank you. You didn't just help me, you helped yourself. She replied within seconds. I finally feel like I'm on the outside of it, watching it burn. When I stepped into the courtroom, Margaret turned to look at me. Her eyes scanned my face with no warmth, no recognition, like I was a stranger who'd intruded on her estate, not her daughter. I nodded once in return. It was the first time in my life I didn't look away from her. I didn't lower my head. I had nothing to apologize for anymore. The courtroom smelled of old wood and lemon polish. Bright overhead lights bleached everything of sentiment. There were too many bodies packed onto benches, neighbors, old family acquaintances, curious observers who'd followed the civil docket out of boredom or spite. My Uncle Peter sat stiff in the back, his wife avoiding my eyes. I noticed Melissa near the aisle, arms crossed, chin lifted slightly like a lighthouse on watch. Andrea was absent, of course. Her lawyer sat stiffly in her place, flanked by Margaret and Robert, who looked as though they hadn't slept in weeks. Judge Landon entered. Everyone rose. Leah stood first. No dramatics. Just precision. Your Honor, she began. This is a hearing regarding the countersuit brought forth by Claire Whitmore in response to the civil claim filed by her parents, Robert and Margaret Whitmore. We intend to demonstrate that Ms. Whitmore was the victim of a long-term pattern of financial misrepresentation, exploitation of legal documents, and digital fraud executed by close family members. She laid out the architecture with brutal clarity: how the trust fund had been altered, how a credit line was opened in my name without my consent, how $25,000 had been siphoned into a private account under the guise of family assistance. When she mentioned the inheritance documents, there was a noticeable stir in the courtroom. Then came the recording, the audio clip Melissa had captured, played aloud for everyone to hear. Andrea's voice echoed in the high-ceilinged chamber, smug and unfiltered. "She'll never say anything. My mom will shut her down if she even thinks about talking." And then the letter, the attempted payoff to Melissa. I stepped forward when Leah signaled. My voice was quieter than I intended, but I held my ground. "I didn't come here because of money," I said. "I came because for years I believed my silence made things easier. For them, for me. But silence is what they counted on. It gave them room to rewrite everything. I'm done being silent." Margaret leaned into her attorney, whispering furiously. He stood quickly. "Your Honor, I request a recess to review the new materials presented. This wasn't part of the original schedule." Judge Landon didn't flinch. "The witness bribery evidence was submitted 48 hours ago and acknowledged by your office. The request is denied." Leah nodded toward me again. I returned to my seat, exhaling slowly, fingers digging into my palm under the table. The tremble in my hands had stopped. Then the gavel came down. "The court finds the evidence presented during this hearing substantial enough to consider escalation to criminal proceedings pending review. The main trial is scheduled for 1 week from today. This court is adjourned." Whispers exploded as the judge left. But I wasn't listening. I was watching Margaret. She stood so quickly her chair toppled backward, the scrape sharp against tile. Her voice cracked not with grief, but fury. "All of this because of her," she hissed. "That ungrateful brat. That woman who doesn't know her place." Robert pulled at her sleeve, murmuring something that didn't reach me. I just watched. My place. For most of my life, it had been at the edges. Silent, convenient, dispensable. I'd tried so hard to fit the mold they carved out for me, to make peace at my own expense. To earn love by erasing myself. Not anymore. I stood straighter. Melissa caught my eye and nodded once, this time in respect, not pity. I was done asking for room. Now I was taking it. Frank's voice cut through the static with urgency. "They're packing up. Andrea's moving money out of her U.S. account. Margaret's name is on it, too." I stood motionless in Leah's office, staring at the window but not seeing the street beyond. The hum of the city felt muffled. They were trying to run. Of course they were. People like them never imagined they'd have to answer for what they'd done. They played the system until it fought back. Leah was already on her second call when I turned to her. "How fast can you act?" She raised one finger for silence as she barked instructions into the phone. "Emergency filing, yes. Freeze the joint account, both names. Don't wait. Flag it as a high-risk transfer. Cross-border. Canada. Medical expense pretext. Yes, I know it's a lie. Just log it." I grabbed my coat. Melissa waited downstairs in her car, engine already running. She didn't speak when I climbed in, but I could see her jaw clenched tight. "They're afraid," she said finally. "That's why they're desperate." I nodded. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. But I was furious at how far they were willing to go. How shameless. Frank had forwarded the account activity screenshots. Andrea had tried to wire $38,000 under post-surgical recovery expenses to a clinic in Vancouver. Another $9,000 to a private holding company under Margaret's name, listed as a state management retainer. Leah's emails flew out in real time, one to the Oregon State Banking Commission, another to the district court clerk. Within an hour, she confirmed a 48-hour freeze was granted, while the court reviewed evidence of fraudulent intent. But that wasn't the part that made my hands shake. It was the letter I wrote that night. I didn't cry as I typed. I didn't yell. It wasn't an open wound anymore. It was the closing of a chapter. "Dear Margaret and Robert," I began. "This is not a plea, nor is it a confession. It's a boundary." I told them what they had taken. Not just money or property, but decades of my voice, my autonomy, my peace. I listed the lies one by one, not for their apology, but for my own clarity. There was no anger in my words, no grief, just finality. I release myself from your expectations. I am no longer yours to control. I printed it, signed it, and sealed the envelope. When I arrived at the courthouse the next day, Frank was there waiting with a thermos of coffee and the newest court filing. The judge had confirmed both Andrea and Margaret's accounts would be locked for 48 hours pending a formal hearing. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard Margaret's voice ricochet off the cold tile. "You can't let this happen," she shrieked at her lawyer. "I'll lose everything, everything." Her voice cracked into a desperate whisper, unaware I was standing just feet away. "I'll drag her into the grave with me if I have to." I didn't react. Not outwardly, but inside something settled. She was cornered and she knew it. The cracks were no longer hidden, they were gaping, and the truth was pouring through. I turned to leave. My phone buzzed. An email. No subject, no name. Just one line. "Do you want to know where Andrea got that $50,000 from High?" And underneath it, an attachment icon. I stared at it. The air around me shifted. The game wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. The name in the email was unfamiliar at first, Ronald Cray, but it thudded in my memory like a bell that had once been struck in a distant room. Then I remembered. A dinner table. I was maybe 12. My grandfather said something about Ronald having more spine than sense, and Margaret had snapped, "That man's a relic. He clings to rules that no longer apply." Now he wanted to meet me. "Before everything is forgotten forever," he'd written. I didn't tell Leah. Not yet. Some truths had to be faced alone. His office was nothing like I expected. It wasn't corporate or polished. It was quiet, like a mausoleum made of paper. Dust coated every shelf. Stacked files lined the walls like forgotten tombstones. The blinds were half closed, letting in only slits of dull light. Ronald Cray looked older than I imagined, but not fragile. His eyes were sharp, pale blue and unwavering. "You look like her," he said without warmth. I didn't ask who. He motioned to the seat across from him, then pulled out a slim folder bound in red twine. As he untied it, he spoke steady and precise. "Your grandfather changed his will in 2005. I drafted it, notarized it, and filed a copy with the state. In that document, you, Claire, were listed as the primary heir to the family property in West Salem." My mouth went dry. "That's impossible. I never—" "You were in college," he said. "He wanted to surprise you after graduation. Said you were the only one who didn't ask for anything." I stared at the yellowed pages as he slid them across. There was the signature, the seal. A line of clear ink declaring me the sole heir of the second estate, with Margaret and Andrea explicitly excluded. "But Margaret," I whispered. He nodded. "She came to me 6 months later. Demanded I hand over the original document. Said it had been a mistake. And you refused." "I did. And within the year, I was quietly severed from all legal ties to the Whitmore estate. Your grandfather died less than a year later. No one contacted me." I felt something fracture in my chest, not a break, but the slow release of something long buried. Rage, maybe. Or grief. Ronald wasn't finished. He pulled another file, thicker this time. "This," he said, "is your scholarship trust." I blinked. "What scholarship trust?" He unfolded the document. "Established when you were 14, funded by your grandfather. It was intended to cover graduate school anywhere you wanted. But in 2021, a $50,000 withdrawal was made. The paperwork is signed by Andrea. Illegally." The floor felt unsteady under me. All those months I skipped meals. When I lived in that moldy one-bedroom. When I worked night shifts tutoring kids of people who'd never once struggled. They stole my future before I even had the chance to imagine it. Ronald leaned forward. "They banked on your silence, your loyalty. That's how people like Margaret survive. not by power but by erasing the truth until only their version remains. A knock at the door. Leah stepped in, her face unreadable. I hadn't told her I'd be here, but somehow she knew. She glanced at the documents on the table, eyes scanning them in seconds. Her nod was small, but final. "These are authentic," she said. "Every one of them." I looked back at Ronald. He placed a gentle hand on the pile of papers like a priest offering absolution or a sword. "You can choose," he said, "to reclaim it all or to forgive. But now, Claire, you finally know the full truth." And for the first time in my life, I did. I stood before the court that morning not for money, not for revenge, not even for recognition. I stood there because justice had always been missing from my life from the moment I was born into that house, and treated as though I'd been a mistake. The courtroom was quieter than before. There was no press today, no curious relatives, just the heavy, dignified air of something ending. The sky outside was soft, pale blue, early spring sunlight filtering through the tall windows like forgiveness that didn't need to be earned. I didn't look toward Margaret. I didn't need to, but I felt her presence like a stone just beyond my shoulder. I didn't turn when the judge read her name aloud or when the mention of a criminal investigation was met with a ripple of discomfort behind me. "Andrea Whitmore is ordered to repay the full sum of $89,300, the judge said, with interest, penalties, and restitution for falsifying legal documents. No gasps, no outbursts, just the quiet scratch of the court clerk's pen. Margaret said nothing. Her hands were folded tightly on her lap, her back straighter than usual, as if posture alone could preserve the illusion of control. Robert didn't look up once. When it was over, Leah and I stepped outside together. She squeezed my hand once lightly. "It's done," she said. But it wasn't anger I felt. It was emptiness, then air. A long-held breath finally released. Margaret found me outside near the stone steps. "You've always misunderstood me," she said. I turned calmly. "No. I just finally stopped needing you to understand me." She reached out, but I stepped back. "You don't get to rewrite this." "Not this time." That was the last thing I ever said to her. I left the city a week later. The house I moved into was small, just outside the old town where my grandparents once lived. The air smelled like pine and old rain. I found myself waking up without the weight in my chest for the first time in years. Melissa joined me soon after. Quiet, steadier now. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't need to. Instead, we began laying the groundwork for something neither of us ever had when we were younger, a future on our terms. We called it Break the Silence, a small nonprofit for those navigating the maze of family coercion, silent abuse, and legacy manipulation, the kind of manipulation that leaves no bruises, only doubt. We started small, a website, a few calls. One woman who'd been trapped for 20 years and finally said, "I thought I was alone." That was enough. One evening, I sat alone on the back porch holding the first copy of the original lawsuit I filed against my parents. I lit a match. The flame caught quickly, curling paper into ash. The wind took it gently, and I watched the dust of my former self float away, not in grief, not in bitterness, but in peace. I wrote one last letter, not to them, to myself. I'm no longer afraid. I was not born to serve anyone's silence. I was born to speak, to leave, to begin. And then I exhaled one long breath after what felt like a lifetime spent holding it in. They tried to silence me, hide behind bank accounts and paper-thin lies, but the truth has its own voice. It may take years, even decades, but when it arrives, it doesn't knock. It breaks the door down. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but it resonates powerfully once it's heard. Perhaps standing up today means you'll never again have to bow to injustice tomorrow. If this story moved you, like, share and leave a comment below. Type 1 if you felt seen, or 2 if you still have questions. Your voice matters.